you have real difficulty regulating difficult emotions. This is the category called borderline personality disorder. Borderline, what does that mean? Back in the day, 75, 80 years ago, psychiatrists said, well, these people are functioning pretty okay most of the time. They've got these conflicts, but every once in a while, they can't tell the difference between a dream and reality, or they hear subtle voices. So these are people who straddle the border between what was then called neurosis versus psychosis. So it's kind of an unfortunate name. Some people say now we should call it unstable personality disorder, because borderline personality disorder, it's very stigmatizing. It's like, oh, you can't treat those borderlines. They manipulate you as a therapist. But the idea is, and there's real data, that for some people, this is a chronic pattern of instability. Now, what are the core features? I said, let's just go through them a little bit more carefully on the slide. You have, everybody's got trouble regulating emotions if the emotion's really intense, but it's a chronic pattern of emotion dysregulation. You're furious, you're better, you're furious again, you can't quite get your relationship straightened out. We talked about in relationships, the person's the greatest lover of all time or a demon, my therapist is my savior, my therapist doesn't get me, I hate him or her. It's called splitting. It's great or it's terrible, nothing much in between. We talked about these brief periods of hallucinations and delusions. Extreme impulsivity. Who am I? We all have trouble knowing who we are, but people with borderline personality disorder have major identity issues. As you might guess, if you've got all these features, your relationships are going to be stormy. And then what's the final feature of borderline personality disorder in the DSM? NSSI, non-suicidal self-injurious behavior. Lots of cutting, burning, etc. Now this is where it gets tricky. Is this person just very dramatic and unstable, and they don't really want to kill themselves, but they're going to manipulate the therapist or their friends or their partners by this unstable behavior to make themselves feel better or superior? Or are such people so unstable that suicide is really always in the back of their mind? And again, there's this border between what is NSSI versus what's a suicidal act. So the point here is that if you think about it psychiatrically, if you see somebody exhibiting an SSI, it leads to the diagnosis that the person probably really has borderline personality disorder. However, and this is a new feature in DSM-5, it's very clear that people with bipolar disorder, people with depression, people who are unstable in other ways may exhibit pretty strong patterns of NSSI and not show the other symptoms of borderline personality disorder. So NSSI is a cluster of behaviors. It's very alarming and frightening and important. Borderline personality disorder is a long-standing personality set of traits that often includes NSSI, but they're not one and the same. You can exhibit these behaviors and not show borderline personality disorder otherwise. Now, let's talk about self-inflicted injury more generally, and especially NSSI as it might relate to borderline personality disorder. Impulsivity is a big part of ADHD. How heritable are ADHD symptoms? 0.7 to 0.8, remember? Vary. Major depression has a lower heritability, but the trait of impulsivity is probably heritable 60 to 70 to 75%. So one of the facets of suicidal behavior and NSSI impulsivity, genes may play a role in this. What about your family? Well, we talked about coercion, remember, is a big trigger for aggressive behavior. Family difficulties don't cause ADHD symptoms, but they may do what? They may maintain them. What if you're born with the temperament of a pretty unstable, impulsive style, and you grow up in a family where you feel that you're never really validated? Brothers and sisters are much more important than I. And there's a lot of criticism, even emotional or physical abuse. So the idea is that if you're highly impulsive and you have a family configuration marked by abuse, or the family doesn't really ever validate your point of view. Now, you're wrong. We treat all the kids the same. Why would you ever think that we treat you differently? That kind of feeling. That's the kind of gene-environment correlation that puts into play a pattern of NSSI and even borderline personality disorder. So we're not doing this, is not a course on neurology, but let's say deep in your brain, your amygdala, which really registers lots of responses to threatening stimuli, is very active, and your frontal lobes aren't very good at inhibiting that. Or your serotonin system isn't very good at regulating your impulsivity. And at the same time, you're feeling devalued by your family, friendless, especially when you're pretty young, then a borderline configuration of instability, overvaluing, undervaluing relationships, and self-injurious behavior may be a big part of this. Again, what are the statistics about NSSI? Well, it depends on how you define it. So let's take out cuticle plucking as, that's very lightweight. If you define NSSI as moderate to severe, cutting, burning, etc., the rate now is thought to be about 1 in 5 high school girls and about 1 in 10 high school boys. This is too big a figure to be explained exclusively by borderline personality disorder. There's non-suicidal self-injurious behavior that, both for these risk factor reasons and because of the contagion, is really exploding before our eyes. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about treatment for the last few minutes, but questions so far on suicide, NSSI, borderline. Question here. Can you consider NSSI as an independent syndrome or disorder? That's a proposal that DSM-5 voted almost in. It's now kind of in there as we think it might be a partially independent disorder, although it might be linked to borderline personality disorder. There's still controversy about that. Way back. Yeah, if I hear your question right, it's a provocative one and a tough one. So there's a lot of affective instability, a lot of pain in the world. So you might, I don't mean choose like it's a conscious decision, you might express that through dysregulation in eating. You might abuse substances to regulate your mood and affect, and you might choose to, quotes again, engage in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior. All of these are destructive at some level the more severe it gets. The question for developmental psychopathology is what particular genetic risk and what particular early experiences in your family and current psychological and peer experiences might shape which path you go in. We don't know enough yet because the risk factors are fairly common to all of these. Why would you, as a teenage girl, restrict your diet severely? We'll talk about eating disorders in a couple of weeks. Why would you choose, again, quote unquote, to use recreational illicit drugs? Why would you say the way to express my pain best is to burn my skin till it's full of really ugly black holes and I feel that pain? We're not quite sure why. Is there any one that's the better or healthiest way? None of these are healthy in terms of their risk factors for a lot of physical and psychological problems, but this is sort of our philosophical and psychological question. How do we explain the particulars? Who else? Right here in front. Yeah, I mean, so it's like anything else. You got an experience like a website. Does the website predict your later behavior, or is it a self-selection? Only certain people go in. It's like video games and violence we talked about in passing a few weeks ago. Video games that are very violent probably make most people slightly more violent, but the people who are most attracted to them are people with histories of violence. So how do you sort out the selection bias from the effect? And when you get somebody who's really emotionally dysregulated and self-injuring, and now they've got a website that shows you the many ways you can hurt yourself even worse, it's probably a pretty bad combination. Right here. So who saw the movie Fatal Attraction, right? So this is a movie from the late 80s, Glenn Close, and it's pretty intense. She plays a pretty classically borderline personality disorder woman who has an affair with Michael Douglas back when he was young and hot, whatever, and he's happily married with a kid, and he thinks, oh, this is pretty casual, and she thinks he's the shining savior on the white horse. And so now he says, I'm going back to my wife, essentially. Oh my God, right? All hell breaks loose. So you as a viewer are saying, well, come on, did she really expect, but, and then she ends up in the emergency room because she's cut herself very badly, and I think swallowed pills, and he goes to rescue her, and then she threatens she's going to harm the kid and what. So it comes across as, she's manipulating the hell out of this guy to keep the relationship going. But from her perspective, there's a level of desperation that you wouldn't call manipulative. That's the difference, right? Right here. So what kind of beliefs about emotions might be part of the NSSI configuration? Right. And so think of, let's say you're on the risk spectrum for bipolar disorder. You've had family members with this, et cetera. Emotions take over. It's not like, well, I feel kind of sad today. Sadness is hard. I'll talk about it. It's like you go from sadness to despair, there's a cement block on the accelerator. And if you've got that kind of history, you probably believe there's nothing I can do to prevent that emotion from going out of control unless I do something drastic. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah, good point. Let's go over here. Yeah. So the question about prognosis, I'll repeat the question for the webcast. Do people outgrow this? Is it like sort of adolescent limited antisocial behavior? And the problem is it's recent enough that we don't have good longitudinal studies to know. We have better longitudinal studies for eating disorders. Many people with treatment, many women can really overcome eating disorders. But most will say, depending on the severity of it when they were younger, the issues about looks and thinness and self-worth never go away altogether. It's like people with depression. You can get treatment and have had a long time between episodes, and then a loss comes in, and it feels just like you're sliding down that rabbit hole again. So it's a question of, what's a cure? Are you over those feelings altogether, or have you learned better ways to cope, but you're still at risk? So we don't know the answer, but there's probably a continuum of resilience. Let's see, anybody else? Did I catch all the questions in front? Right, so one of the old definitions of NSSI is this is a cry for help. You don't really want to kill yourself, but you're feeling bad, and you're going to do something pretty drastic to get somebody to pay attention. Well, just the way I said that, doesn't that sound manipulative? Right? And so this is why there's such stigma. Forgetting the deep pain inside that I'm not just trying to manipulate you, I don't know how to express this any other way, and this is my way of regulating emotion, not a very healthy one, and it's a way of getting somebody to pay attention, but it ends up being a vicious cycle too often. Right there. Yeah. You. Right, so what do you do to cope and control? So let's talk about treatment for a little bit. We just have a few minutes left. Borderline personality disorder is the disorder that a lot of therapists say, get the borderlines out of my caseload, right? Those are the calls on weekends. I don't know if it's a cry for help or a real suicide attempt, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of stigma. And again, we talked about this a few minutes ago. Maybe if we rename this unstable personality disorder, it takes away this kind of borderline shit. I'm not sure that renaming it would be the total solution. So one treatment is, if it's really dysregulated emotion, maybe antidepressant medications to get rid of the underlying depression, or mood stabilizing or antipsychotic medications to get away from some of the irrational thinking would help. They provide some benefit, but these are not cures for NSSI or borderline personality disorder. The most evidence-based treatment is a relatively new treatment, the last 20 years or so, devised by a professor up at the University of Washington, Marshall Linehan, who has said, we got to do things differently if we're engaging people like this in treatment. The therapist is not going to get into crisis management all the time and debating and setting limits. The therapist has to be accepting of the fact that this person's really emotionally dysregulated. Yet at the same time, the therapist says, here's the times we're running our group or your individual session, and you're not going to call 24/7 after that. So it's both acceptance and limit setting. Does that sound paradoxical? It is. That's why it's called dialectical behavior therapy. Like Hegel, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, like Marxian theory. By kind of posing opposites, being very accepting of the person's dysregulation, yet setting clear limits about it, maybe the person's going to learn to kind of grow and find coping mechanisms. So the therapist, unconditional positive regard and validation, but you're going to point out that this seems maladaptive, manipulative, in a kind of neutral way. I'm going to jump ahead just in the interest of time. Mindfulness training is part of dialectical behavior therapy. Trying to get people to tolerate that every day doesn't go smoothly. Everybody's got to tolerate a lot of stress and distress. And maybe people who are prone to NSSI and borderline personality, the first sign that something's going wrong is like, oh my God, it's like that entity belief, right? I'm all the way gone. A lot of DBT is done in groups, so you get other group members providing support, but then there's individual therapist contact too. So again, remind the person that you as the therapist value them. You're going to set some limits. You're going to try to point out some of the maladaptive ways. As the person's doing mindfulness work, you're trying to gradually teach better and better emotion regulation strategies. DBT has a success rate for people with NSSI and borderline personality disorder that we haven't seen with other forms of therapy so far. So it's very interesting. There's some centers in the Bay Area now that do DBT, and it's, in many ways, it's something new under the sun. Marshall Linehan's work is quite provocative to have a different way of thinking about therapy for people like this. So with that in mind, we've got a break till next time, so we'll see you then.